chuyển lên phía trên ha, chúng ta còn 80 ghế đây.
Chào các bạn. Tôi là tôi là sinh viên văn hóa ở đây trong Nam Trung Hàn Mỹ và hôm nay tôi rất là hân hạnh giới thiệu một thành phần của mình và một viên chức năm xưa tên là anh Nguyễn, và anh sẽ giới thiệu về vấn đề xin thi thủ tục visa thế nào ở Mỹ. Thì xin vỗ tay cho anh.
Hello everyone. Trước tiên là em cần phải nói là em là người Mỹ gốc Việt, cho nên chút nữa anh sẽ trình bày trước. Vì sau đó nếu có câu hỏi gì thì em sẽ cố gắng trả lời bằng tiếng Việt nha. Okay. Nhưng mà bắt đầu tiếng Anh, ok? Alright. Alright. So to begin with, my name is Nguyễn. I am a consular officer at the U.S. Consulate General in Ho Chi Minh City here. I am a consular officer, so I deal with student visas. I imagine I will be seeing many of you in the near future, and I see a great many students in my time here. I've served here for about 10 months. I really enjoy interacting with students, and nothing makes me happier than to issue visas for qualified students to study in the United States. There are a couple things I want to clarify before I begin. While I was outside, there were many questions about the U.S. visa process and how that has changed in the recent days. I think a lot of you are wondering, does that have any impact on Vietnam? The short answer to that question is no. So if you're thinking about applying for a student visa, I would proceed as if you're going to anyway. Nothing has affected Vietnam. It's affected a number of countries, but Vietnam is not one of them. So don't be concerned about that. I wanted to get that out of the way right away. Next, I'm going to give you a presentation on the process for actually applying for a visa. So I'll walk you through that. There's a presentation I'm going to show you. And I know that you guys have a lot of questions. So afterwards, I'm happy to take those questions and I'll do my best to answer them. I should say though, many times people have very specific questions about your own case. For the purposes of this meeting, I'm going to keep my answers very general. I think that's more helpful for a huge group like this. So I know you have a lot of questions about your own cases, but if you want to catch me afterwards, my colleagues and I are here and we can do the best to answer those. For the purposes of this presentation, I'll keep things very general, okay? All right, so to begin, student visa process. Where do you start your research? Where do you start learning about how to study in the United States? How do you go about it? The U.S. Consulate and the American Center, we have a program called Education USA. This program will give you the very basics about how you can become a study abroad student in the United States. Everything from materials on specific schools, particular majors, and it'll set you on the path to applying for a visa. So it'll outline the basis or the process for applying for one and how you can jumpstart your own journey to studying in the United States. Okay? So the very top is the website, and then we also have a center that's on Lê Duẩn, and I think many of you have actually been there before, so it shouldn't be anything new. Okay? Moving along here, just a picture of a visa. It shows you what a student visa looks like. When you apply for a student visa, it is an F1. That's the category you're looking at, okay? moving along. Perhaps the most important form or document you'll need to apply for a student visa. When you apply to become a student, the first step in the process is actually submitting an application to a university or a school in the United States. Once you've been admitted to that school, as a study abroad student, what that school will then do is issue you an I-20. This is a document that you will physically need and present to a consular officer when you come in for the interview. There are 3 items you need actually. So the first one, and probably the most important one, is your I-20. The second one is obviously your passport in order to travel internationally. And then thirdly, what you should probably have as a student are your transcripts, right? Because those documents will demonstrate that you are a legitimate student and you're prepared to study in the United States. So just remember that 3 things: I-20, passport, and your transcripts, okay? Hộ chiếu I-20 với học bạ bằng điểm. Moving along here on more technical issues. I mentioned I-20. What you're also going to need to do is pay your service fee. This is a fee that you pay in order to get you registered in the system as a student. So when you apply to become a student, you're going to pay your service fee. This actually activates your I-20 and makes it valid so that we can proceed with the interview. And thirdly, you're going to need to do what anyone else needs to do when they apply for a visa, regardless of whether you go as a student or a tourist or not. There's a DS-160, which is a very general application on your data, where you're from, how old are you, do you have family members in the United States, do you have immigrant visas underway to actually immigrate to the United States. It provides very basic information on your background so that when the officer goes through your file, they'll know a little bit about you before the interview actually begins, okay? Still sticking with the theme of preparing for the interview, not actually being in the interview yet. You can apply for a visa, an F1 visa, within 120 days of the start date of your program. So when you've been admitted into school and you've learned that the first day of school or the first day of your program is on so-and-so date, you can take that date and map it back by 120 days. And as long as you're within that window, you're okay to interview. If you interview before that, potentially you could get turned away because you're not up for the right date for an interview. Or we could interview, but issue you the visa later. So just think about that. It saves everyone a lot more time if you do it within the 120 days that you're supposed to. To schedule an actual interview, you're going to go to a website that's associated with a consulate, ustraveldocs.com. And you can go about scheduling that way. And again, it happens within the 120 days, but also at the very earliest available date. How are you doing, guys? Everything okay? Sorry, guys, 1 second. While they're working on that, I should note that ustraveldocs.com is a one-stop shop for everything you need for your visa interview. So it'll outline precisely what you need for the interview, what fees you need to pay, your service fee, the I-20 document that you need, the passport that you need, and any other related documents that you might need for the interview. Okay? What's included in your application fee is the actual appointment date, which is very important, so that you can show up for the particular day. You'll also have access to a call center. You'll be able to contact the call center beforehand if you have any questions or if there's any confusion related to your application. They can answer the questions for you. And lastly, in the case that you're issued a visa and we decide that you're eligible, we will deliver the passport and the visa to you directly through a courier service. Okay? Moving along here. All right. I think the part that you're all curious about, the actual interview. You guys ready for this? So very basics for that day, things that you want to keep in mind as you approach your interview. We understand it's a very nerve-wracking process. Just some things to keep in mind as you head in for it, okay? Just to keep yourself at ease. Arrive on time. This goes without saying, but be there before your interview. You are going to go through security, so just be aware that when you approach the consulate, you're going to have to give up certain things like your phone. You're going to go through security. They'll allow you to hold on to your paperwork for the actual interview. You're going to line up just like anyone else. We'll then take your fingerprints at a station. You're going to line up for the interview, and then finally, you're going to be introduced to someone like me. I'm the actual interviewer, so you may or may not see me on the visa line, okay? And finally, if we issue your visa again, we'll mail it to you through a courier service. All right, so what should you think about talking about for the interview process? For a student, what I would advise you to do is be prepared as much as possible. Have all your documents before you, and as I mentioned, you're going to need your I-20, you're going to need to pay your service fee, you're going to need your transcript, you're going to need your passport, obviously. But also, in the back of your mind, when you prepare for the interview, have some very clear reasons about why you want to study abroad in the United States. Okay? Think through that. What are you going to study? Why do you want to study in the U.S.? Why do you want to study in the U.S. as opposed to another country? Why is the U.S. the one place that you want to go to? Think through all that and apply a critical thinking process so that when you approach one of us, you talk very naturally about what your future plans are and what you hope to get out of your studies in the United States. The second one goes without saying, show us why you're a good student, right? I trust that most of you in here are well qualified, you've performed really well throughout your studies. We might have officers who ask for your transcripts, and they're gonna look at that to assess what your academic performance has been in Vietnam. And this is a way of projecting the likelihood that you will succeed when you go to the United States. Are you a good student here? The next one, also very important. So beyond demonstrating that you're a well-qualified student, be prepared to explain very, very clearly how your family intends on paying for your education, okay? I can't stress this enough. When you come in and you interview and an officer says, "Ba má làm nghề gì?" Don't answer by saying, "Kinh doanh." Okay? Em phải nói kinh doanh gì? Em phải nói chính xác ba má làm nghề gì? Okay? So don't be general, because here we're looking at a very specific thing. We're looking to see how much you've thought about your finances, how much you've planned for your finances, and how you'll pay for your education. there needs to be a lot of thought into this. So don't think that when you interview, and there's a question about your finances, that there should be a simple answer. No, we want you to get very deep in terms of the financial plan, okay? We want to be confident that when you go to the United States, you have the means to pay for it, because education is very expensive even for Americans. And you need to demonstrate how you'll pay for it. And lastly, a lot of you asked me outside, is English required? It's not. So the simple answer is it's not. But if you approach the interview with English, that demonstrates that you have been preparing to study in the United States, right? Because educational instruction in the United States is done in English. And so if you approach the interview intent on sharing your thoughts in English and showing that you've made some progress over the years in studying the language, we will view you as a serious student. So again, it's not required, but it'll help. It's an important factor in assessing whether someone's a legitimate student or not. Okay, your paperwork, the things I mentioned, I-20, we want to make sure you pay your service fee, your transcripts, your any test scores you might have. And lastly, your financial ability. We may ask for financial documents. Usually we're going to ask you to just explain how you're going to pay for your education. But in rare moments, an officer will say, có hợp đồng lao động của ba má không? Or có giấy tài chính gì không? Có giấy tài khoản gì không? So, have it. We might not always ask for it, but just make sure, this is part of being ready, right? Have everything, so that when the officer wants it, it's there. The worst thing that could happen is you show up and there's something missing, and you know, the officer might ask you to come back at a later date. Okay, moving on to the actual substance of the interview. I can't stress enough, one thing that I think is really important is don't come in with a memorized speech. Don't memorize a page of why you want to study in the United States. A lot of students, they come in and they have the same lines, right? They say, you know, I want to study in the United States because it's the greatest educational system in the entire world. I hear the weather is beautiful, and I want to become a great student and then come back and contribute to the economy. We've all heard that. What's helpful is if you've thought very personally about why you want to be a student and you explain with passion about what you want to study and what you want to do with your life and how your education in the US will help you eventually with your plans. So if you come in scripted and you memorize a page, it doesn't really help. What we're really looking for is, can you answer our questions naturally? And can you explain your future plans in a way that shows you've thought a lot about it, okay? And then, we're going to ask how you've prepared for it. What did you study for undergrad? What did you study in high school? What do you want to study for university in the United States? How do those two relate to each other? How does that fit with your plan in the future? What do you want to be after you graduate? So make sure your story makes sense, it's lined up, and it's something that you can deliver very quickly in an interview. You should know that in a visa interview, those take approximately 2 to 5 minutes. You have very, very little time to explain why you're a qualified student and why you should be eligible for a visa. Which gets back to my point about being completely ready when you show up for an interview, okay? All right, next one. I also heard this question several times outside. A lot of people ask, should we approach a service to help us prepare our applications? For the US consulate, we would advise no, okay? Oftentimes, these agencies, these services, they don't know what we look for. And so when you show up for an interview, you might be approaching the interview with advice from these services. Their advice might be wrong. So you may very well want to approach them, and they charge a lot of money, but it doesn't give you much more of an advantage if you just apply directly for an interview. And again, in my experience, these services, they actually cannot give any valuable information in terms of attaining a visa, okay? Generally, they're not very helpful. So don't waste your money, apply directly, and I think you might find that more fitting. Okay, there are 3 factors that we look for during an interview. And so when I approach an interview, I'm assessing you based on these 3 things. Your ability to be a successful student. Em có thật sự là sinh viên không? Anh sẽ có nhiều câu hỏi về vấn đề đó, okay? Thứ hai, em có đủ tài chính không? Do you have enough money to pay for your education? And you want to be very specific about your financial plan. I mentioned this earlier, but put a lot of thought into explaining to the officer how you'll pay for your education. Think of specifics, okay? Chẳng hạn, nếu ba má buôn bán, okay, buôn bán cái gì? Cung cấp cho ai? Có mấy nhân viên làm cho ba má, okay? Think about all that. Đừng có chỉ nói ba má kinh doanh. It doesn't help. Em phải nghĩ một cách sâu sắc, okay? And yeah, English. If you use English, càng nhiều càng tốt. Nói tiếng Anh càng nhiều càng tốt, nhưng mà không bao giờ sẽ bắt buộc. Nếu muốn nói tiếng Việt thì nói tiếng Việt. Các viên giúp đến nói tiếng Việt. Okay. Nhưng mà chỉ nói thầy nếu sử dụng tiếng Anh nó càng nhiều thì càng tốt. That's all. If you are refused, you can apply again. You can always you can give it another shot. The only thing I would say is, if you are refused, think very carefully about whether your application has changed significantly before you apply again. Okay? Nếu em mới vừa bị từ chối, okay, rồi trong vòng 2-3 tuần em trở lại, viên chức chắc chắn sẽ hỏi có gì thay đổi không ở trong hồ sơ của em. Đừng có nói là em tự tin hơn nha. Nội dung ở trong cái hồ sơ của em phải thay đổi trước khi em trở lại. Cho nên theo luật pháp là em có thể phỏng vấn một lần nữa, ok, không có ai cấm em. Nhưng mà chắc chắn là nếu em mới giờ bị từ chối là viên chức sẽ hỏi, ok, em mới phỏng vấn có gì thay đổi không em? Vậy nếu em nói tự tin hơn thì viên chức biết rồi là không có gì thay đổi. Okay. So think very, very carefully about whether your application has changed or not. And if it hasn't, maybe you should wait and see if your grades have changed. Maybe go back to school, get better grades. Or if you think maybe it was your finances, maybe wait until your financial situation has changed. And one more thing is, if you've been refused a few times, then you should understand, according to U.S. law, a number of officers have already decided you're probably not eligible. So again, I'm not discouraging you from applying for a student visa, but if you've been refused multiple times, then maybe think about why and how long you should wait before you apply for a new one. Okay? Yeah, this is my last point. unless something has truly changed with your application, think about it. Think about it very deeply. And there are some myths that people have, or some questions people have about our visa process that I should answer before we move to the Q&A session. A lot of people wonder if there's a quota system. Có hạn chế cho số lượng của những người đi Mỹ học. Nước Mỹ không bao giờ cấm số lượng cho những người đi hết. So there's no limit. You can, as many people can go as possible, as long as you're qualified, as long as nếu theo luật pháp của Mỹ có đủ điều kiện và có thể đi. Okay? And yeah, just think about your student qualifications. If you are a serious student, we want you. We want you to study in the United States. It's important. The cultural exchange is a pillar of the relationship between the U.S. and Vietnam. And one of the key parts of that is study abroad, right? Students coming to the United States, studying in the U.S. system, learning about America, learning the U.S. system, learning about the U.S. government, how we operate, and returning to Vietnam and contributing to your society. So we encourage it. If you're a serious student, we really do encourage you to study in the United States. Number 2, don't have your paperwork, but officers won't always look at everything. Keep in mind, we only have 2 minutes to decide if you qualify for a visa or not. We can't, there's no way we can look at all the paperwork, okay? So you might have it, but just be aware that there are moments when we may not look at the documents. So be prepared for that reality. Another myth. A lot of people are concerned that if they have family in the United States, they automatically don't qualify for a visa. That's not necessarily true. What we do ask is that you're honest. You need to be very clear on whether you have relationships, familial relationships with anyone in the United States. Okay? Cho nên nếu có bà con ở bên Mỹ, cái đó không có liên quan gì tới vấn đề mà cấp visa hết. Nhưng mà trong khi mà phỏng vấn á, chỉ phải nói đúng sự thật thôi. Okay? Cho nên đừng có lo về vấn đề mà có bà con ở bên Mỹ. Okay? Lastly, there's no right answer. This gets back to my point. Don't memorize a speech before you come in and speak with an officer, okay? A lot of us have heard the same lines, the same speeches. What we're really looking for is how much thought you've put into your future, what you want to get out of an education in the United States, how you'll pay for it, and what you'll do when you come back. So be prepared to speak very naturally about your experience as a student and what you want to get out of your experience in the United States. We know that the weather in the United States is beautiful, but that has very little to do with your plans. We want to hear about your plans. According to us, during the interview, you are the most important. So we like the sun too. We think it's beautiful, but focus on yourselves, okay? And here are just some helpful websites you can check out as part of the visa process. And that's it in terms of the presentation. Nếu ai có câu hỏi gì không thì anh có thể trả lời.
Chị đừng với ai hết.
Xin phép anh là cho tôi hỏi một tiếng Việt. Khi nãy anh nói là có 3 cái vấn đề quan trọng để mà được cấp visa. Thứ nhất là phải là một người sinh giỏi, sinh viên giỏi. Thứ hai là đảm bảo đủ tài chính. Và thứ ba là phải trở về Việt Nam. Thì 2 cái vấn đề đầu á, học sinh giỏi hoặc là chứng minh tài chính thì rất là có thể là chứng minh được. Còn cái vấn đề thứ ba là trở về Việt Nam, làm sao chứng minh trở về Việt Nam, cái đó nó trừu tượng. Xin thêm một số cái chỉ dẫn thêm rõ hơn về vấn đề.
Ok.
Xin cảm ơn.
Đối với vấn đề mà trở lại Việt Nam á, là viên chức sẽ xem một số vấn đề. Okay. Bà con sống ở đâu? Có bao nhiêu người ở đây? Có bao nhiêu người ở bên Mỹ? Cái đó là thứ nhất. Thứ hai, có đủ tài chính ở đây không để trở lại Việt Nam? Và thứ ba là chương trình cho tương lai của mình. Ok, mình học xong ở bên Mỹ, rồi sau khi mình trở lại mình sẽ làm gì chính xác ở đây. So to answer your question, we assess whether you're a legitimate student or not by those three plans, and I'll say it again in English. Yeah, we want to make sure you're a legitimate student. What do your grades look like? What has your academic performance look like? Number two, where do your finances lie? What do your parents do for work? What have you been doing for work after you study? And then thirdly, what are your future plans? And for sure, when we ask you, you need to have some concrete idea about how you will contribute to Vietnam's future. What will you do when you return here? Those are things that factor in heavily with a visa interview, and you want to think about that. Okay. Next.
Tôi có một câu hỏi về cái liên quan tới vấn đề là nếu như mà gia đình có một cái bảo lãnh ung thư về định cư, nhưng mà cái thời gian mà để mà có thể mà để được xét cái hồ sơ đó thì còn rất dài, nhưng mà con thì nó đến cái tuổi mà nó sẽ có thể đi du học, thì cái việc mà xin visa đó nó
em hiểu. Ok, em nói cụ thể quá thì không được, nhưng mà em chỉ nói chung là cả hai quá trình là hai quá trình khác. Ok, không có liên quan gì hết đó. Cho nên nếu mình có hồ sơ định cư và mình muốn xin visa đi du học, cả hai quá trình khác nhau. Cho nên trong khi mà chẳng hạn em phỏng vấn, em cũng biết vậy thôi, em nói ok, ở đây có hồ sơ định cư, nhưng mà không có vấn đề mà mình bị từ chối tại vì mình có hồ sơ định cư. Ok, chị hiểu không?
Câu hỏi kế tiếp ạ. Xin vui lòng giơ tay.
Chào anh, cho em hỏi là nếu như trường hợp mà mình tốt nghiệp đại học tại Việt Nam nhưng mà mình lại apply hồ sơ vào học cao đẳng cộng đồng ở bên Mỹ thì nó có ảnh hưởng tới việc xin visa của mình?
Em không có hiểu, em học xong ở đây.
Dạ, tốt nghiệp là đại học tại Việt Nam rồi, nhưng mà mình lại apply vào trường community college ở USA.
Ok,
thì guess visa cứ dễ không?
Em đã lấy bằng cao đẳng ở đây hả?
No, he finished his university here.
Oh,
Or
so
the university.
bachelor's?
Yeah, he got a bachelor degree.
Ok, vậy em đã lấy bằng cử nhân ở đây, vậy em muốn lấy thêm một bằng nữa ở Mỹ. Em có đi làm.
Community college. If he wants to go to community college.
Yeah, ok, trong trường hợp đó là viên chức sẽ hỏi tại sao. Ok, tại vì em đã lấy bằng 4 năm rồi em muốn đi qua bên Mỹ để lấy bằng cao đẳng. I don't understand. Trong trường hợp đó thì viên chức sẽ không có hiểu. Nhưng mà nếu em muốn lấy bằng thạc sĩ, then ok, tại vì em đã lấy bằng cử nhân này. Em hiểu không?
Phía sau ạ.
Hello.
Hello.
I want to ask something. I have like family in USA.
Yeah.
But can I answer direct to them? I have a family in USA, or I have to lie or something to make sure that I pass the visa.
Okay. You just hit on a topic that is very, very important. As I mentioned during the presentation, if you have family in the United States, we will factor that into our decision, but it's not the single factor that will disqualify you from a visa. You need to be truthful and honest when you apply for a visa about what family you have in the United States. Okay? Tại vì trong khi mà anh phỏng vấn á, anh sẽ biết là em có bà con ở bên Mỹ ở trong hồ sơ, phải không? Nếu anh hỏi, anh chắc chắn là anh sẽ hỏi em có bà con ở bên Mỹ không? Rồi nếu anh nói không là kể như là đi đất liền. Okay? Vậy em phải nói đúng sự thật. So always be honest when you have familial relationships in the United States. Don't think that you can approach the process with withholding information from the officer. It usually does not work out well in those situations. Okay, so just be honest.
Về vấn đề bà con thì cho xin hỏi là bà con được định nghĩa là như thế nào? Ví dụ như là mình có bà con mà được như là anh em họ của mình, của bản thân mình, không phải là anh em ruột của chồng hoặc anh em ruột của vợ, thì cái khoảng anh em họ đó nhiều khi hiện tại bây giờ ở trong Việt Nam mình cũng không có liên hệ với họ, nhưng mà trong dòng họ thì nghĩa là anh em họ có ở bên Mỹ thì mình có khai trong hồ sơ không ạ?
Trong khi mà những chức hỏi thì mình chỉ nói như thôi. Mình nói là có bà con bên Mỹ, nhưng mà có thể bà con xa, mình không có liên lạc lâu rồi, chỉ nói như thôi. Trong tình hình nào cũng phải nói đúng sự thật thôi. Tại vì trước sau gì nhưng trước cũng biết là mình có bà con ở bên Mỹ. Nếu mình không có nói đúng sự thật là không có tốt.
Câu hỏi kế tiếp ạ.
Xin chào anh. Mình có visa đi du lịch Mỹ rồi, mình có gia hạn rồi, thì lúc đó thì mình muốn học ở Mỹ thì mình xin tiếp cái visa khác, hoặc là mình qua Mỹ mình apply visa thì có khó khăn gì?
Em trả lời mấy cái trường hợp mà cụ thể quá thì không được. Nhưng mà em nói chung là luật pháp Mỹ không có cấm. Nếu mà mình có visa du lịch thì dĩ nhiên là mình có thể xin phép đi du học bên Mỹ, không có vấn đề. Nhưng mà em trả lời câu cụ thể quá thì không được. Cảm ơn anh.
Câu hỏi kế tiếp là dưới đây có ai không ạ? Phía trên đây. Anh cho em hỏi, em có 2 câu hỏi là em có gì ruột ở bên Mỹ, nhưng mà ở bên giấy tờ bên Việt Nam của mình đó là em không có kê khai là có gì ruột bên Mỹ. Vì khi mình phỏng vấn mình có nên nói là mình có gì ruột ở bên đó không anh?
Dạ, trong khi mà phỏng vấn nếu em hoặc là bỏ quên là không có đăng ở trong DS-160 của em ở trong hồ sơ của em, trong khi mà phỏng vấn chỉ nói ok có tội là tôi được việc vậy. Vậy thôi. Chỉ có một vấn đề rất là quan trọng, nói đúng sự thật. Okay. Nếu có bà con ở bên Mỹ thì mình nói không có bà con ở bên Mỹ, hoặc là họ là bà con xa hay là gần cũng không có nhận nữa. Okay. Any questions in English?
Dạ, có ai hỏi tiếng Anh không?
Anyone? Give me one in English.
It's just so confusing that you said. Alright, so it's just so confusing that you said it's gonna be, you gotta be honest with the people you interview with, right? But you said, like, if you have family in the US, you would be considered, like, I will stay there because it's easier for me to stay there because I already have family there than go back to Vietnam.
Sorry, I don't understand your question. You did fine with your English. I like your English.
I
don't get the idea.
It's confusing because you said I just need to be honest. But
Yeah.
if I be honest with you, I said I have family over there, and you gotta think that maybe she has family over there, so she gonna stay, you know. So.
Oh, so you're talking about cases where you think the officer thinks that you have family in the U.S.
Yeah, so it's gonna be a barrier.
Okay, so a very natural question for us. You might not have family where you applied for school, or you might not have family in the U.S. at all. But what we do pay attention to is when someone applies for school in the U.S., oftentimes here, probably by word of mouth, a lot of the schools that students in Vietnam apply to are communities with a lot of Vietnamese in the U.S. So California, Seattle, Virginia, Texas, New York, Massachusetts. And so when you come in for a visa interview for a student visa, and suddenly your school is somewhere where there are thousands of Vietnamese, we're going to ask why. Maybe we don't think that you have family there. We're not accusing you of having family, but we'll say, okay, you applied to Northern Virginia Community College, right? There are thousands of Vietnamese there. So we're going to say, how do you know about this school? Why did you apply here? What are the reasons that you want to go there? Who do you know there? Maybe you don't have family, but maybe you have a family friend that suggested it, or you have a friend already there who suggested it. So we're just digging deeper to figure out what is that relationship between you and that school. But we're not necessarily accusing you of having family in the United States. Does that make sense? Because if you look at how diverse schools are in the U.S., you have some schools that are in very far-flung areas with no Vietnamese. You have other schools where there are thousands of Vietnamese. So it does make an officer wonder. When you apply to school with heavily dense Vietnamese populations. We'll probably ask you, how did you hear about this? But don't think that we're accusing you of anything. We're just wondering, we want to get deeper and figure out why you chose that school. Okay?
Ai có câu hỏi bằng tiếng Anh nữa ạ?
English, please.
Tiếng Anh, vâng. Okay.
Hi. I was wondering about some question about the I-20 issue.
Okay.
I'm attending to a community college next year, and I was wondering to be invited for the school to send me an I-20 document. Would I need all the paper like the temporary high school certificate, or I just need bank proof, IELTS, TOEFL, and that's all, and they just send me an I-20, or I need all of it.
Okay, so to attain an I-20, it's a very simple process. What you want to do is apply to university in the United States, assuming you get admitted into school. The school will automatically issue you an I-20. The I-20 is for the purposes of a visa interview. And it shows that you'll be engaging in a course of study or a program in the United States. So there are no, beyond the requirements for applying for school, you don't need anything else. So if you've been admitted, then you approach the school, the admissions office, and you say, I've been admitted, I live in Vietnam, I need an I-20 for the visa interview, and that's it. You don't need anything else. Okay? Is that clear?
Okay, chúng ta còn thời gian cho 2 câu hỏi bằng tiếng Anh nữa. 2 câu hỏi nữa.
My own question is, I'd like to get the MBA in specifically Georgia State University. But admission over there, they look at my transcript and advise that I should get the credit at like college, but it is called perimeter in Georgia State. It's the same system with the university, but they advise that. So because I already got a BA in Vietnam already, but it's a long time ago. So my question is it logical that to explain in such case that based on the advice from the Georgia State University like that?
So you're talking about transferring credits from your BA to your MBA? Do I understand that correctly?
I already sent my transcript to the admission office, and they, based on that, they replied that I'm not yet qualified for the MBA program at the moment. They need me to pass some more credit at the undergraduate, about 2 years.
Okay. Unfortunately, I'm only here to answer questions about the actual visa process. I can't answer to that specific situation about what your MBA program is looking for, or the qualifications for it. Where I can be helpful to you is once you've been admitted, what's the process for applying for a visa to go to the US to actually go to that program? So if I were you, I would actually approach the school and say, what else do I need in order to be eligible for studies? Okay?
Câu hỏi cuối cùng của ngày hôm nay.
You know, U.S. University has opened many programs for international students, and each program has different I-20s. So how do you evaluate the I-20 of academic English, the I-20 of pre-master, and the I-20 of master program?
Yep, absolutely. Probably, so the two factors that I look for, and most officers look for, are the language requirements. So you mentioned that. If the language requirement says that you should be proficient, student is proficient, that means you need to be proficient. So when we start the interview, I'm not going to talk in Vietnamese. I'm going to ask you questions in English. And if you look uncomfortable and you're not answering me in English, or you ask to speak in Vietnamese, that demonstrates to me that you are not proficient in Vietnamese. And so according to your I-20, legally you do not meet the requirement to study in the United States. Now, the opposite situation is, if your I-20 says requires course of study in English, and you engage me in Vietnamese, that's perfectly fine, because that means that you're probably going to study English for a year in the US before you start your actual course of study, your program, right? So one thing I would encourage all of you to do as students is look at your I-20 very, very carefully. If it says student is proficient, that means the moment the interview starts, we expect you to be proficient. We're expecting to speak English with you. The flip side of that is if it says that you are required a course of study in the US, which does not require English, but you engage me in English anyways, that shows me that you've been trying. That means you've been studying on your own, you've been taking courses here, you're giving a good faith effort to be a good student in the United States. So it works both ways. The second thing I'll look for, just very quickly, is occasionally you guys will get scholarships. You're all very bright, so I'm sure the scholarships are lining up. But on your I-20, there's a part that talks about the finances on the right side. If your school has issued you a scholarship, we will look for that. That means that it's an important factor into whether you qualify for a visa or not, because it shows that you have the finances, right? Occasionally, an officer will miss that, so be sure. If you have a scholarship on your I-20, one of the first things you should say is, I have a scholarship on my I-20, please look at that. It's a very important factor. Unfortunately, sometimes it's missed, so just be sure to point that out for officers, okay? It's a very important thing.
Thank you all. Cảm ơn các bạn. Xin vỗ tay một lần nữa cho các bạn. Nếu các bạn có gặp bài khám, chúng tôi ở đây lúc đến 6 giờ. Và cũng chuyên năm tiếp tục lúc đến 6 giờ. Có bạn visa ngoài và chuyên năm sẽ tiếp tục. Cảm ơn các bạn.